Track A, Overview of Certification Systems, X509, CA, PGP and SKIP.
Ed Gerck, who was scheduled for yesterday, has been rescheduled to this track. So the next speaker is Ed Gerck, who received his doctorate in physics from the Ludwig Maximilians University and the Max Planck Institute für Quantenoptik in Munich, Germany in 1983, with the maximum grade awarded for that. Since 1986, he's been an active consultant and developer in the field of security and cryptography for both commercial companies and government organizations. He's also the founder and current coordinator of the Meta Certificate Group, or MCG, an open and international nonprofit group active in the field of internet security and certificate standards, certification standards development with participants from over 28 countries. Ed Gerck has been appointed in 1999 to the NSI's RAB, the Registry Advisory Board of Network Solutions in, of all places, Herndon, VA, in the United States. Dr. Gerck's most recent papers can be found at the MCG site, and I believe the URL, the URL is on his materials. So, without further ado, Ed's got a lot of materials, so let's introduce Ed Gerck. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I would like to invite questions during my presentation. If at any moment you think there is an important question you want to ask right then, please do. My presentation is titled Certification Beyond Introduction, and this has more than one meaning. It is not only an introduction to the subject, it goes into what is behind certification, but it has also a very definite meaning, which is certification is that what happens after introduction. So first you have a handshake, you have some sort of introduction, then you have certification. So certification beyond introduction shows this point, that certification is something that happens after the initial contact. We will be seeing here several certificates, but I will focus on X509 and PKX. Why do we need certification? Well, this is a known joke. It is not actually a joke, because it may happen. You don't know who's on the other side. One interesting remark made by George Tenet last year was that much of the public discussion and rhetoric is about encryption, but very little attention is focused on what makes it trustworthy. And certification is what makes it trustworthy. But, however, is trust infused in the certificate somehow? Of course not. A certificate is not trustworthy just because it's digitally signed. It must be something else that makes it trustworthy. And that's what we will see. The Internet is a global network of private networks. This is very important. The Internet is not a public network. It's a global network of private networks. Everyone is responsible and actually quite independent to do whatever they want. If they want to use protocols that do not interoperate, their problem. They're out of the Internet. Or sometimes their solution, their way to be secure. The Internet is a point in the sense that everyone is close to one another. For example, all the .to domains are not, of course, in Tonga. And a domain that ends in .jp must not be in Japan. And so on the Internet, you cannot actually see through the DNS where that site is. And another thing is that sometimes a site halfway around the globe is closer, quote, in time of access than a site close by. Just before this last problem with root servers at NSI, there was a measurement made by someone that is in Virginia, close to NSI in Herndon, and many times the root server that bind choose based on speed of response was not the root server nearby at NSI, but a root server on the west coast of the US, and in many cases, more than 5, I think 6 or 7 in the run, a root server in Japan. So in that sense, Japan at that time was closer than a root server nearby, some miles away, even though both are very high-speed links. So the internet is a point. That means that we all share the same network, and everyone is at the same point. Anyone can be at the same point. Not only everyone is at the same point, but anyone that wants can be at the same point. And identity is not easy to define. On the internet, you never control both ends of a communication channel. You only control your end. Doesn't matter if you receive or send, you only control what your side is. This is very important because sometimes this assumption is simply forgotten. We used to think of networks, and in networks we have a thing called a trusted user. What is a trusted user? A trusted user is a user that has certain access rights that the administration has given to him. Well, on the internet there's no administration. So the concept of a trusted user has to be very different. There's no one to assign wide internet access rights. The communication path is non-physical. It was very interesting, the slide that Bill showed here with 2 different endpoints, and we saw there were many different possibilities. And it may include eavesdropping and active interference. The closest metaphor is that internet communication is an anonymous postcard. It's answered by anonymous recipients, open for everyone to read, open for anyone to write, but it must carry specific messages. The reason I'm motivating this is because once we realize that no one can control both ends, we just control our end. If I send or if I receive, I have then a perfectly impenetrable wall here, and the internet to me is just this wire that comes to my computer. Anything else besides this wire, it's mainly my imagination. It's mainly my software. I can be sandboxed, and I can have the impression I'm on the internet, but I'm not. So the internet for me is just that wire. Certification cryptography, some brief comments. Bruce has mentioned some of this, so I can just go very quickly. Cryptography allows for public key exchange, and certification allows for mainly 2 things. There are more, but mainly 2. Origin authentication and data integrity authentication, which has nothing to do with cryptography, because a private conversation with a thief is not secure just because it is private. So just encryption is not the only answer. We need to go to certificate beyond introduction. We need to see what is behind that. Encryption provides privacy, but does not provide security. Certification answers 2 main questions. Is this what was sent? Which is data integrity. Who sent this, or what sent this? Origin authentication. But it still does not provide security. Trust answers 2 main questions. Can I rely on this information, and to what extent? So what happens here is that certification is providing us information, but can we rely on it? Can we use it in our decisions? Can we trust it? You know, trust is earned, not simply given away. How can I rely on that information? What was really sent? When was it sent? Is it sometime perhaps a replay? Who is at the other side? Is that key really from the sender? Is the key still valid? Certification does not answer these questions. Encryption does not either, because a private communication with a thief is not secure just because it's private. Now this is what will allow us to understand what's behind this. We have here a source and a receiver, and information is being sent from the source to the receiver. This is one of the most important slides, so I'll spend a few seconds with it. Information is defined as that what the receiver does not expect. For example, if I say it will rain frogs tomorrow, this is information, even though it's wrong, even though it won't rain frogs tomorrow, because you did not expect me to say it. So information, in the definition of information theory, has nothing to do with knowledge or meaning, with wrong or right. Information is simply what you do not expect. If in a communication process, information is transferred from a source to a receiver, and that information was already present at the receiver, there's no transfer. It was already there. What makes that information meaningful is the trust channel. And trust is qualified reliance on received information. We have heard the word trust here many times today, and perhaps we will hear more times in the next days. But perhaps if we ask around what is trust, we will come perhaps with 300 different answers. However, that can't be so, because if we are to assign a meaning to the words trusted certificate, what do I mean by trusted? If we have to depend on a certificate that I trust, what do I mean by that? We have somehow to define what trust is. We have somehow to make it uniform in a certain sense. So trust is a qualified reliance. Trust is not simply something you extend. Trust is a qualified reliance. But it can be something you extend if you have qualified reliance on the environment. That's what happens in a network. In a network, a trusted user is a user that has an extension of authorization. A trusted user is a user that's authorized to use a certain number of resources. So that user has authorization to use that, and that is called a trusted user. However, to us, and we are taking now the subjective instance, what do I think trust is? How can I measure the quality, the reliance quality of information? Trust is what the receiver knows, is what I'm sure of. So it's actually what I know that I know that I know. I not only know it, I know that I know. I can recall it at once. And I know how it works. I know what it means. So trust is what I know, I know, I know. It's not only what I know how to use. I can recall it at the moment. And that's why trust is indicated with an exclamation mark to make sure that we keep in our minds that trust is what I'm sure of. Trust is what I rely upon. This can be made more precise. Information is that which is transferred, and the definition of trust in terms of communication theory, which will be quite useful, is that trust is that which is essential to a communication channel, but which cannot be transferred from source to destination using that channel. Now this is an important point. Why? Because many times people say, okay, trust is out-of-band information. But how do you trust the out-of-band information? How do you trust that other channel? So what we have here is a nested concept, is a backward-looking trust chain. Trust is that which is essential to a communication channel, but must use another channel. However, how do I trust that other channel? By using yet another, and yet another, until I arrive at the channel that I say, okay, this channel, I have absolute belief, somehow. So we have here a sequence of systems that go from the user to the application to the underlying operating system to the hardware platform and so on, until we say, okay, this I trust. For this purpose, it's qualified. I may not trust it for $1,000 transaction, but I may trust it for 100. So by seeing trust as that which is essential to a communication channel, but which cannot be transferred through that channel, opens up a series of possibilities in order for us to really define if the system is trusted to that extent or not. I'll give you here an example. Trust is oftentimes used to offset power. Of course, if you have full power, infinite power, you don't need trust. You just go and apply the standard solution, get all the armored forces and destroy everything, right? But we don't have infinite power on the internet. In fact, we have no power. We have this wall. We have no power over the other side. So what can we do? We need to develop trust. And I have an example which may highlight this in a metaphor. It's an example between a lion and a lamb. The lion is the metaphor for power, and the lamb is for absence of power. If the lamb sees the lion, and the lion says, okay, come here, I'm not hungry, should the lamb believe the lion and go? If the lion says, come lamb, trust me, I won't eat you, trust me, is that trustworthy enough for the lamb to go and close to the lion? Of course not. The lamb would need a different experience, for example, seeing that lion slaughtering many lambs and eating to satisfaction, to know that the lion is not able to eat, even at once. There's no desire there. So just by using a self-declaration, trust me, this is good, this is safe, this cannot convey trust. Self-declarations cannot convey trust because self-declarations are on the same channel. So information is what you do not expect, and trust is what you know. Before we go into certificates, because this is the underlying aspect of certification, some simple applications that we may fall every day. First, trust is subjective. In its essence, trust is very much like beauty. Beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. So trust is something that I evaluate based on my viewpoint, on my platform. Trust is not transitive. The fact that I trust my brother doesn't mean that I must trust my brother's friends. Trust does not extend transitively. And there's another interesting point, is that trust is not socially distributive. I may trust my lawyer before I know my lawyer trusts my competitor, but not afterwards. So the sequence of trust is very important. But what happens if I don't know that my lawyer trusts my competitor? I have no way of knowing this. So there is always the possibility of what I call an unfaithful proxy. So there's always a possibility that that person you trust, before that trust was established or afterwards and you don't know it, had another trust relationship that will defeat the whole purpose of what you think is secure. This now will be easy to see in a relationship between a CA, a subscriber, and a user, where we have also three parties. And another aspect is that trust does not depend on synergy. Just because many people say trust something does not mean it must be trustworthy. So self-declarations cannot convey trust. Therefore, absolute certification does not exist. A certificate cannot certify itself. Then we need we have essentially two types of certificates. Extrinsic certificates that depends on reference outside the dialogue. Intrinsic certificates depends on references inside the dialogue, and combined, which combine both. What is a certificate? What is involved in certification? Certification is a tamper-proof binding within the limits of cryptography between the public key and some desired attribute, usually the entity's name or the entity real world confirmed in identity or email. But the certificate still contains all the previous questions. How was that certificate issued? How is that recognized? How about revocation, distribution, and so on? And here I must say that I have all this in the folder, and what I'm doing here is the paper in the folder, it has many hypertext links to many references. So instead of presenting that, I am presenting a view of what you will acquire if you follow all the links and you say, okay, this is what sums up to. So what I'm presenting in the slides is not what is only in the paper, but also in the links. So what I'm doing is I'm bringing that trusted context into play and presenting here a nexus that will allow you to have a working picture of what certification is all about. Because no matter what standard we have of certification, certain principles must be followed. One of them is that self-declarations cannot convey trust. So we need to work on this. And those principles will be general enough. So you can, in your daily work, verify if what you are trusting is really what you should trust, and if you're perhaps not forgetting something that you should not trust and is influencing the result, like I mentioned about the competitor's lawyer. What do certificates provide? We have seen what they do not provide. What do they provide? They provide tamper-proof attributes. They allow verification by software hardware. They are a type of safe memory in the sense that they cannot be tampered with. They can be used for a specific purpose, and they can deny specific purposes. Types of extrinsic certificates. We can sum up all the different certificates in three different types. One is directory methods, x509, PKX, and CA. The other is referral methods, PGP, and the other is collaborative methods. I will not dwell so much on PGP and SKIP. I will stay more on the x509 and PKX. The rest is in the material. But each of the above paradigms deals with the basic certification question a different way. However, they all share a common ground, is that they depend on reference, all three of them, that lie outside the dialogue. And that is where we have to ask if that certificate is valid or not. This will just position the problem here in reference to x509 and PKX, which is what a certificate is in the directory model. And now, I want to call attention to the fact that we have here three parties, yet we have a fourth one, which is a CA, a subscriber, and a user. A subscriber is that which has a contract with the CA, and a user does not have it. So there is a very much forgotten fact here, is that the user who must rely on the certificate that has the subscriber's name and was issued by the CA is not privy to the contract. This means that the subscriber has a contract with the CA. They have their mutual assurances which they found were okay. But the user is outside of that contract. The user essentially has zero warranties, and that's what's stated in the warranty of those CAs. The user, who is the whole internet has no warrant whatsoever. A certificate is what CA says. It just contains information as is. It is endorsed sans recourse, as it says in English law. So a certificate contains data from the subscriber, but this data just passes through the CA and is available for the user. Even though the CA may check something, there's no obligation to do it. And under X509, the only obligation the CA has is to verify that the public key of the subscriber has a counterpart somewhere. So a certificate for those that must use it is actually a bag of bytes. You may rely on it, but you may rely on it based on your decision. There's nothing that says that you have a contract that says, okay, if this is wrong, you have some insurance. No, users have no insurance. Users have no contract. They may have rights, but they have no liabilities. There's a difference between rights and duties and power and liabilities. Users have rights, but they cannot use that to flow back into liability. There are some trust relationships happening here, and this is apparent in this slide. We have now 4 entities. A certificate is linked to 4 entities: the CA, the subscriber, the user, and the attacker. We must not forget the attacker. I did not put bad luck, because bad luck is the attacker, suppose, but also exists. So any of these links represent a trust relationship. There's a trust relationship between a CA and a certificate. That's obvious, because if the CA does not take care of its private key, anyone can issue a certificate with that CA's private key. There is a link between the certificate and the subscriber if the subscriber provides wrong information or information that is in time wrong. That is also invalid. There is a link to the user. The user must use it in a correct way. The user cannot just take it for its face value. So the subscriber relies on the user on a certain way to use it correctly. And there's a link to the attacker, of course. And those are role models. So the same subscriber can be a subscriber, a user, and attacker, and mount an attack to the CA in order to discredit the CA. So what we have here is a 4-party relationships with all different types of 2 and 3 and 4-party relationships you can imagine. And this brings us to today's certification paradox, which I want to emphasize. It's the privacy versus security. Suppose you would give out no information, nothing. How could I certify you? So you must give out something. And this something must be enough so I can grasp you, I can get you, which you may not want. For example, CA, such as VeriSign, requires subscribers to give out their SSN. And many complain, why should I give out my social security number if that's not needed in cryptographic certificates? Because that's the way they have in their system to easily check some data about you. It's their way of doing business, and a way they can do it for many. However, that is a privacy risk. And in fact, the paradox is, if you deny information, you are the subscriber, if you deny information, you cannot be certified. And now if you put yourself on the user's shoes, if you do not accept information, if you do not receive any information from a subscriber, how can you certify it? If you just are bound to accept a certificate by what it says, how can you verify it? So there is an intrinsic tension here between your loss of privacy and your capability to be certified. Another point is that certification has no warranty. It is as it says. There's no semantics involved. And a third point is that revocation has no warrant at all. So there are two different issues here. One is certificate issuance, when the certificate is issued, and the other one is certificate revocation. Now the problem is that certificate revocation is what matters. Because if you have a certificate issued to someone, that is fine and good, but what happens if you have to rely on that certificate in order to close a deal? And then you have to make sure that that certificate has not been revoked. There are several simulations that, for example, start with the following scenario. A certificate is issued on the east coast of the US and revoked on the west coast. How many millions of dollars are lost per second until all those things match? Because the revocation of a certificate does not revoke it. It's a will to revoke. It lives in a revocation list that the user has to access. Now, can you tell me what browser today accesses CRLs, certificate revocation lists? None. No browser today checks revocation lists. So what's the use of a certificate that was issued, but when I have to rely on it, I have no way of verifying if that certificate is valid? So this is an important factor. If a certificate is valid for more than 4 weeks, the current estimate is that this certificate probably could have been broken into the private key. The private key in a normal user will not probably live more than 4 weeks of an attack. However, they are issued for 1 year. So trust on a certificate depends on the date of issuance. If you get a certificate that was issued just yesterday, it is somehow more trustworthy than a certificate that was issued a year ago. Because many things may have happened in a year from now. So the important point here, and the last one, is that revocation has no warranty at all, because you have no way of checking. No browser checks that. Now, another important point, as I told you, a certificate is a bag of bytes. But many people don't see that. They think a certificate has somehow captured the spirit of the person or the identity of that person. No way. A certificate, we need to distinguish between real-world certification and data certification. Real-world certification allows the assignment of legal rights, duties, because you have the legal persona. However, data relies on public keys, emails, pins, GNs, names, which may be faked. You know, it may come as a surprise to you, but in the UK, anyone can change their name at will. And no name is less legally mine than any other. If I'm in the UK, I can be called William Shakespeare, and I can go to a college or do whatever I want under that name. And that name will be legally mine in the same way as the name I had when I was born. I received it. I was told that in Texas, you can do that for 2 months, but not after that. So it depends on where you are in the world. In the UK, that's how it is. A name can be changed at any moment without any formality. There's no need to tell anyone. You just change it. Data needs a leap of faith to go to real world. So if you have a name of a person, James Doe, you need a leap of faith to connect that name to James Doe. That leap of faith is not to be found, the base for it, in the certificate itself. And data certificates do not translate towards data certificates. And that is one of the worst misnomers in all this. Because if you take, for example, a gold certificate of deposit, or a bank certificate, or a land certificate, certificate means certain. So those real-world certificates carry the idea that they are certain. And now you add to that certificate authority. So many people think there is some authority involved here that certified something. However, they are self-appointed authorities. A certificate authority is used in the same way that you use it in Unix or on GNS. An authoritative response is a response which I author. So I am an authority over my own authored work. And that is the sense that authority is used here. A certificate authority is an authority on its own making, on its own words, on its own assignment. So we have the combination of two powerful words that actually have no semantics as we are used to them. So certification is expressed by certificates. One comment. I think one of the perhaps useful ways to see a certificate is a communication channel from one entity to another. So a subscriber wants to send some information to a user. And a certificate is that communication channel between a subscriber and a user. Now, some people, for example, users, think differently. They think that a certificate is that thing which absence makes them read annoying messages. Okay? And a subscriber that buys a certificate from the CA actually thinks that the certificate is a bribe they must pay to that CA in order to free their users from multiple annoying messages. So to many people, certificates are simply a way of getting rid of multiple annoying messages. And that is the reality of the field that we must cope with. So to many people, certificates are just something that which absence makes it annoying. Doesn't mean that they perceive the need for that certificate. So a certificate is a secure communication channel. And now we come to an important point that I would like to ask your attention. Suppose I tell you that I will send you a gift. What do you think I'll send you? I tell you, I'll send you a gift. What do you think I will send you? Any idea? I will send you a gift. What will I send you? A cash, a present? You know, well, when you arrive at that conclusion, or a gift certificate even, you use the trusted context that I'm speaking English. However, the same word gift, same pronunciation, same syntax means poison in German. So if I would send you a gift, I may send you poison, and that is as well correct. So what is the meaning behind expressions depends on what you trust. Trust is that channel which gives meaning to information. So I want to ask you, is it true that true equals true? A simple expression, I mean, I'm making it simple. On purpose. True equals true, that's exactly what's there. Do you think it's true that true equals true? Depends on semantics, not on C. Must be true equal true. If you put that expression through a C compiler, it will balk. Oh, wrong. It depends. Depends what meaning you assign. Depends on the semantics. So without meaning, you actually have no communication. Without meaning, you just have bags of bytes. So this is the important thing here. If a certificate is a secure communication channel, how can I assign meaning to what I receive? If I receive a certificate saying, this is the certificate for James Doe, email so-and-so, public key so-and-so, what does it mean? We come now to the topic of certificate reliance, which links to certificate revocation lists. I will comment on two different modes of reliance, both valid. There are more modes of reliance. And I motivate them by a simple question. Certificates are truthful because they certify, or certificates certify because they're truthful? This is not a play on words. It depends what do you base your decision on. On the first phrase, you base your decision to trust the certificate because they work, because they certify. On the second phrase, you say the certificates will certify because they are trustful. Someone told me they are trustful. The second mode, when I say that a certificate works because someone told me they're trustful, is called objective reliance. This is useful. For example, in a company where I have a specific practices and procedures, and I have a company behind the CA, is internal to the CA. So if I work for that company, I can very well receive that certificate because the company tells me it's trustful. The company is responsible for that. However, that doesn't happen on the internet. On the internet, there's no boundary of governance. The internet is a global network of private networks. It's a network of networks. There's no administrator. On the internet, certificates must be understood in the first sense. Certificates must be trustful because they work. Trust is earned, not simply given away. So, if I'm on the subjective stance, then I'm using the trust model of the internet because risk is borne by the user, the verifier, the so-called relying party, who is in the subjective stance. I must rely on that information. Now, this goes a little bit deeper into the legal meaning of relying party. A user, even though it uses a certificate from a CA, is not a relying party to the CA because that relationship is denied. So I mainly have to rely on my own decisions. So trust is neither embedded nor infused in the certificate. One common question I get all the time is, please give me a list of trusted CAs so I can put them in my browser. How can I know which CAs will you trust? Trust for what? When? For what purpose? That is a question you must answer yourself, based on your viewpoint, on your subjective stance. Trust is relative to the user's point of view. Trust is in the eyes of the beholder. And now, I will explain in this slide, in a geometric way, how X509 certification works, PKI-X. What you have here is two axes. If someone doesn't understand what I'm saying, because I'm trying to keep within the time, please ask. You have the key on the vertical axis and the name. Anyone can have any key, any name. We have here Bob with key K3 and a revoked certificate for Bob K1. It's revoked. And another certificate for Skywalker, for example. And there is a CA at the origin of the certificate axis that gives meaning to these key and names. And Alice now wants to certify Bob. So using X509 and PKX, how does that happen? Well, first you have a key invariant step, which is I don't care what key it is. I just trust the CA and get the public key from the CA. I have no way of knowing what the root key is. Bruce just commented that Netscape's root key will expire. Well, that's a problem because there's no way to really reinsert a new key based on an expired one, a new root CA key. So the first step is key invariant. You must trust the CA. You must trust that that public key is correct, no matter what comes. You have no way of knowing it. Usually this comes in your browser, but who knows what's in the browser. The second step is trust invariant. No matter what key Bob has, okay, you will trust, no matter what trust you have to Bob, you will trust Bob's certificate if it's signed by that key you acquired in the first step. So those are two orthogonal things. So first, you don't care about the key, you trust the CA. In the second step, you don't care about trust on Bob, you use that CA key. Now, what happens if you got Bob's revoked certificate? You have no way of knowing. So we need now to introduce a third step, which is not in PKI-X or in X509. It must reside on the application. It must be an action by the user, or must be an action by you in e-commerce where you have the risk, or where you are a system administrator. You must ensure that the application does this third step, which is CA invariant. You now, after you acquire the CA root key, no matter what key, after you use that to check Bob's key, no matter what trust you have to Bob, you now must use that key from Bob in a challenge response to Bob, and make sure that Bob wants to use that key. So the third step is independent of the CA. You just go into dialogue with Bob. And now this is very important. Why? Because as you go into that dialogue with Bob, you may develop a business relationship first. And now you have a second base of trust. Which is that dialogue you developed with Bob over perhaps months. So those three steps are summarized here as a way of improving upon what I mentioned before. Yes, a certificate does not mean that it is valid. How do I do that? I have three steps, and the last step, which is to challenge the subscriber's private key and enter into dialogue and derive from that dialogue, from that experience, some trust method, will allow me to develop a new trust center, so that the CA certificate is like a booster rocket. I can eject the booster, and I can use that new trust relationship for future use. So, going back to the first slide. On the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. Why? Why is that so? Now, we will answer that based on what we've seen so far, and I'm at the last slides. Because the internet can only transfer names, references, bags of bytes. That's all the internet can transfer. It cannot transfer what they mean. If I tell you I'll send you a gift, you don't know what I actually mean with that. I don't know if you have seen the show by the Treasure Island when the two ships fight each other. Have you seen that? There's a hotel here. Well, the bridge commander, the bridge captain, when he sees the pirate ship, he says, let's fire a shot across her bow so they get our meaning. Okay? On the internet, we cannot fire shots so people can get our meaning. The first solution to this, of course, if the internet only transfers references and does not transfer sense or meaning, I ask for more references. Give me the whole encyclopedia. The privacy of the other party suffers. Give me your SSN, give me your driver's license number, give whatever you want, whatever I want. But still, those are only references. Sense still has not been transferred. Solution 2 is to request a certificate, and that's where a certificate is useful. The privacy of the other party still suffers. Certificates are also references. Sense is still not transferred, but you now have a way of acquiring a value, such as the public key, that allows you to engage in dialogue, where you can develop a later trust relationship. This can work in various ways. You find certificates connected with email, CAs, PGP key rings, and many different systems. And essentially what I have said today was in certificate beyond introduction, is that certification is what happens after that introduction. What is the introduction? The introduction is those two steps provided by x509 and PKIX. When you have verified the public key of a certificate, you have not actually certified yet. You depend on a binary dialogue. So certification does not stop when your browser says it's okay. you must understand, and users must understand, and secure applications must understand that it is a continuous process that goes beyond the introduction, because that's when trust is developed. This presentation unites in this aspect then all the three methods. In all the three methods that I spoke about, you will find the same point. So at the end, what matters in the certification is the trust that you develop based on that certificate. The certificate does a tool for you to start something. And the main flaw is when certificate is used as an end and not as a means. So, to summarize in one phrase, certification is just a means to an end. And that's why I speak about certification beyond the introduction. It goes beyond that phrase. Okay, thank you.